Welcome to 5 Dubs by MDDC Press. I'm your host, Rebecca Snyder, the Executive Director of the Maryland, Delaware, and DC Press Association, which represents news media in our region. 5 Dubs focuses on the who, what, when, where, and why of local news media. We'll talk with the journalists about the stories behind the news. You can find more information about our guests in the show notes or on our website, www.5-dubs.com. Welcome. We are here talking today about the critical nature of local news, and there's a terrific new report that has been commissioned by one of our guests and created by another of our guests. So let's jump right on in. Today I have Melissa Milios Davis, who is the network manager of Press Forward, and Darryl Holliday, who's the co-founder of Commoner. So let's first start off with Melissa. Tell us just the really highline view of what Press Forward is doing and why you're commissioning reports about local news.
So, thanks for having us on the show. Press Forward is a nationwide philanthropic initiative to really draw more attention to the importance of local news and the role that it plays in helping everyday people make decisions about how to engage in their communities and just all sorts of things that make communities healthy and possible. So this, over the years, hasn't been a primary philanthropic priority for a lot of foundations and major donors. A lot of folks have been supporting local news for a really long time in the public media sphere, but more and more hyperlocal news is really important to the future of our communities. So we're trying to bring more philanthropic attention to local news as a public good.
Yeah. And I think that is so critical. The hyper-local, I think national news sucks all the air out of the room on what's happening, but really our lives are most affected by what happens in our backyard. And so, Darryl, the way you approached this white paper, I thought was really unique and interesting in that you kind of looked at where people were getting their information. It wasn't strictly let's do a readership survey or how do you consume news, but you looked a little bit more globally. So could you talk a little bit about Commoner and B about what kind of fueled your conception of this report?
Sure. So at Commoner, my partner Annika and I, we see this organization as making civic life more accessible and inspired. So we work with philanthropies, nonprofits, other organizations to take really ambitious ideas and make them actionable. I come out of hyperlocal news. I've been a reporter for I don't know how long, 15 plus years, I guess. I've worked in Chicago at various newsrooms. I created a nonprofit in Chicago called City Bureau, which created documentaries, which I think is a really great example of why and how people are getting engaged in the production and consumption and distribution of high quality, accurate news information. So this report was in a lot of ways like acknowledging and celebrating that journalism is critical, that local news and information is so important to where people live and how they function, how they govern and run communities, but also that a lot of people contribute to the work of creating information, not just journalists. So we were trying to figure out a way to reconcile that, right? And kind of dig into the past to figure out, the models that we have, how are they made? Like how did policy shape what we have currently, and where are we now today? So maybe I'll pause there. But yeah, thanks for having us on this call. I'm looking forward to digging into this conversation.
Well, and I have a little crush on City Bureau because I think they're doing such interesting work. And I love how it pulls from lots of different demographics and lots of different format and focuses on the content as opposed to, the sort of the production around it. So yeah, I totally want to get into that. But my first sort of thought hearing you talk about the report, and I want to get into sort of what you found in the mechanics, but the way you framed it feels like sort of a paradigmatic shift in the way news media has been perceived. Like if you think in the Wayback Machine, news media has been sort of a gatekeeper. Like we are presenting news to you, and that in like a very democratic, like democratic with a little d, society, everyone wants to participate in that. And there was the fears of like, well, what about citizen journalists or bloggers in the basements and whatnot? So how do you just philosophically, I think that's a really interesting space. And I feel like Press Forward is living into that as well. Can you talk a little bit about that shift and how you see it in terms of a modern sense of journalism?
Um, yeah, I'll try to. I mean, I guess in short, at a very high level, I think the gatekeeper era has been over for some time. Social
Hmm.
media, and for better or worse, has claimed a bit of the space. Big tech has claimed some of the space. We've seen, you know, news and information democratized, but um, the standards and the frameworks and the way that we think about this work haven't always kept up with how
Hmm.
technology has kind of forced a change. It's let more people into this work. So in a lot of ways, the report is advocating for a structured version of that for journalists to acknowledge the role that not just influencers and content creators play, but documenters, people who are learning these skills in public access stations around the country, um, people who really want to play a role in stewarding, shepherding, maintaining, protecting, sharing information in their communities. And really trying to bring that full circle to the role that journalists play, the professional role, like J School, like the inverted pyramid, all the classics, right? How do we open that up to more people while
Hmm.
maintaining um, rigor and verifiability, right? How do we make sure that information is reliable and trustworthy while um, acknowledging that the gatekeeper days are long gone in some ways. The days of an editor sitting in a room with a reporter and just kind of making the agenda for the week. Um, it might still happen, but you look at X or LinkedIn or all social media that you're on, it's happening there too, right? It's happening
Right.
in different ways. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, I think it was important for us to take a look at the structure through policy. I think policy is such an important aspect of this conversation, but the Public Broadcasting Act enabled public media, the Cable Communications Policy Act enabled public access, on and on. The Postal Service Act, we can go back. Public policy has enabled this kind of work. The Section 230 of the Communications Act enabled social media.
Hmm.
Um, but what we really are moving towards in this report, and I think really advocating that we move towards as a field, is less construction of the idea of local news information and journalism around tax status, and more
Hmm.
around what communities really say they need and want in order to make good decisions, in order to have more folks running for office and attending public meetings and meeting their neighbors and setting up gatherings and all those things that I think people have been telling us for years and years that they want to do in their communities. How are we a partner as journalists, as newsrooms, a partner to them in that
Hmm.
work as they are becoming more increasingly partners to us in the work of producing news and information?
And it strikes me like this is very, almost in marketing speak, it's very client centered work, and I think Melissa, looking to what Press Forward has been doing, sort of shaping um, through philanthropy and through very targeted and high dollar infusions, to say, this is how we think, these are the things we want to try. And so, how are you kind of seeing? Uh, uh, was there any? I'm curious. Was there anything that surprised you about this report? I mean, when you commission a report and you're saying, "Go get him, Tiger," you never quite know what you're going to get back.
Yeah. You know, like to me, the report really put its finger on something that I have felt is a little unsettled within the field itself, which is this narrative of loss and
Mm.
decline, and like news deserts and things. But when you ask people about their news and information environments, it's often overwhelmed. It's often they're not perceiving a lack of information. And so how do you reconcile those things? To me, it really helped me think about a framework to put relative descriptors to the different types of information that make up our
Mhm.
information ecosystem, especially at the local level. Because I think because we're hit with so much information from various sources, especially online, some people don't notice the missing pieces, and so what Darryl was saying about, the increasing role, I'd say over the last 20 years. I mean, I'm a journalist at heart. I was a trained journalist. I worked in newspapers and in radio and digital prior to joining press, nonprofits and philanthropy. And I, you know, so I was, trying to make sense of, this information ecosystem as I'm coming through it as well. And, I think the takeaways for me were really helping give some definition to those and the relative benefits of different types of information and how they can kind of play a role in the civic life of 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 residents.
Mhm.
That they're all important, and that it changed my thinking from one of news deserts and lack to one of abundance, and really thinking of institutions like universities as partners, or even PIOs at government agencies. They're doing different things, and we value different pieces of these ecosystems for different ways. And it gave us, I think, the language, to really talk about the relative strengths of these different types of information stewards and sources.
Well, and it strikes me like when we think about kind of all the different chunks of information coming to us, like you have, local government maybe putting things on their website, and you have the PIO putting out their press release or answering specific questions, and you have like all these data points. And it feels like what's really necessary is someone to like knit it all together into something cohesive and allowing it to be porous enough so that I can, as a consumer, I can say, okay, I want to understand that a little bit more, or I want to go deeper here. Is that, sort of as we think, because press forward, of course, is really, and we're all about the future of journalism because such a
Hmm.
critical element in our society. I mean, we're in a failure is not as an option situation, but how do you feel like that ties into where we head next? And is it like hearts and minds that we're changing, or is it presentation? Is it like, what do you think knits it together? And I felt like I rambled a little bit there. So
Yeah.
pick out any
No.
pieces of that you want to respond to.
Yeah. I mean, I'll start and then hand it to Darryl, because I think Darryl has thought a lot about this. But I mean, I often think about the changing role of the journalist, and even now, with AI, as being a conductor, a host, or like,
Mm.
a convener. playing some of these different roles than they might have in the past. Um, and, you know, having the commitment to independence, I think, is the unique
Right.
piece. And I think that, like, that's one of the reasons that I really appreciated Commoner's approach to this was, reminding us that the unique role of journalism is often that independence. They're not, you know, uh, working for an organization like a government agency or a business or even a
Right.
university or a nonprofit. They're not maybe promoting their own brand like an influencer or content creator, but they're often working alongside, some of these folks to cover what's going on in the community, and so I think that I almost always use the word curator almost of reliable, trusted other sources, and kind of if I had to think of a vision for that future would be, that evolving role of a journalist as more of a curator of
Hmm.
reliable, trusted sources in partnership with some of these other information stewards.
Hmm. Darryl, what are you thinking?
Um, I'm gonna ramble a bit too, probably. I'm like,
Go
this is
for it.
Oh, I was
Because these
part of
are like
this.
big picture issues. Like these are deep philosophical challenges.
right,
Yeah.
right. And I think part of the challenge of all this is to make it really real and practical. I feel like this field that we're all in, we're like actively debating and aligning and figuring things out. So I think this is important because eventually we need to be able to make this case to the public, right?
Hmm.
To be able to explain to people and show people why there's a different way possible, how you can be a part of this and not just a spectator or a consumer having things told to you constantly and wondering, is it true or not? I mean, verification is the thing that we ultimately came down to. That is like professional journalists' key role in all of this. Um, we have three categories. It's local news providers that are journalists and newsrooms, and the three categories of information stewards. The second is civic promoters, which is government agencies, like we said, PIOs, libraries, nonprofits, schools. And the third is community catalysts. So engaged residents, neighborhood organizers, local advocates. Um, all of those people, we think at Commoner, and I think a lot of folks in this field really over the last 10 years have been really coming around to and exploring and refining. Um, they all do different roles. Like this is an ecosystem approach, right? It's broadening. We need many more people involved in the solutions process of how we, keep verifiable, high quality information in our communities. Um, that said, we found a number of things that people in those groups do, not just reporting. We facilitate heavy conversations. We document things that are happening, like the documenters. Um,
Hmm.
Commenting, we inquire, we sense make, we amplify, we navigate, and we enable people to connect. Um, and all of those functions, I think, are shared across the broader ecosystem, not just journalists. So part of me is like, how do we help journalists um, play that ecosystem role? How do we instill that kind of ecosystem field mindset? Journalism, I think, for a long time, it's got that. But I say this as a journalist who loves the craft, loves the profession, has always had the kind of like lone wolf,
Yeah.
kind of like the
Like here's my
intrepid.
scoop.
Yeah, an individual, right? It's the intrepid reporter, like is hunting down the story and uh, big ideas of like the first draft of history. This role is the only one in the constant. It's all that stuff, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think part of this is um, breaking that down and really figuring out what actually of that belongs in the civic sphere. Which of those things can be done by people to um, learn new skills to help their communities. And maybe one thing I'll say, I think you asked sort of like where is this all going, and maybe I'm paraphrasing a bit. Um, I think part of it is making the case to the public, but I think about like the CPB right now, the
Hmm.
dismantling of the CPB, which is going to be disastrous for communities. There will
Right.
be a time where we rebuild the CPB, right? Like a new administration is going to come in at some point. I don't know if we're going to rebuild it the exact way that it was. I kind of hope it's not exactly the same, but there will be opportunity um, to do this again. Right. I don't think this is permanent. So I think, there's a mindset of like, this is kind of the end right now of a
Right.
cycle. I think it could be seen as the beginning. Like, are we preparing for in 5, 6 years from now when the doors are open and someone wants to redo this thing? I want it to look like this. Um,
Right. And
Less
so
news, all that, more people, all these folks that we're talking about being involved in this process.
I know,
Mhm.
and so just for those who don't know the acronym CPB, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, of course, right now, super in crisis because defunding is really going to affect, lots of. I live in the Washington, Baltimore metro area. Melissa's in Denver. Darryl, you're somewhere in California, maybe with a public broadcasting area. Like these big cities, probably going to be okay. But those smaller communities, much like their hospitals are drying up, their PBS stations will be, their public media will be drying up too. And I think that's a really good point, Darryl, to think of this not as we could think of this as a very scarce time. And in some ways, yes, I'm not being Pollyanna-ish that, there aren't problems in the world, but we can't hunker down and just decry what's going away without making a plan, like thinking of this as our fertile winter time. The
Yeah.
seeds have to sleep,
Mhm.
and we do have to figure out how we're going to come in a very intentional way back.
Yes.
Um, but I feel like we can get into that for it as well. There's so many places we can go on this conversation. But I wanted to, in all the discussions of like the role of the journalist, I heard independence, I heard verification, I heard, sort of curator, but what I didn't hear was objectivity. And so, like, where do you see that, and everyone has their bias. And I think sometimes that works against the idea of journalists. But can you talk about, because it's not a loss of objectivity, but that didn't come up in any of the things that we were talking about. So can you address that within sort of what you're seeing in that role of journalism?
Melissa, you want to take that one, or should I? Should I give it a pass?
Well, I mean, I can, we just recently, through Press Forward, commissioned quite a lot of research, aside from the commoner publication, to really understand what people in America want from local news, what
Hmm.
they value, what they expect from local news. And one of the most common things across geographies, across political divides, across age ranges was, straightforward, just what I call like just the facts, ma'am. Like
Hmm.
people want to feel like they're just getting, like you said on your podcast, just the unvarnished, like we're just here rolling tape. Like
Hmm.
we're not here to have any, and I think journalists and most people, like most people that get into the field of journalism, feel like they can bring that, but I think more and more there's just, an importance to have humility in that and just to recognize that, everyone has their perspectives and their blind spots, and I think there's a difference between, this kind of idealistic, maybe unrealistic version of objectivity and a commitment to really try to be fair and to present a lot, not both sides, because there's not always just two. It's like a holistic view of what happened, in
Hmm.
this situation, so I think I think that's still a noble venture and it's still what people expect and want, but there's a lot of ways to get there, and people can get there by just being super super transparent and authentically who they are and having, their own blog about that, and just, covering the city council, and who it's from, and there's just transparency there. So, you know, I I guess that's a long way of saying that, like, I don't think like objectivity is, like a, a dirty word or anything, but I
Oh, right.
also think that it's just like it's become this divisive way of thinking about journalism when it doesn't really have to be necessarily. And that most people, like I said, from our research, they do want to feel like, this isn't, they know what they're getting, at least from
Mhm.
the people who are sharing the stories with them.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have anything to add on that, Daryl? Or not to rush you, but I have another question bubbling in my head.
Um, no, go ahead. It might come back up. I do like talking about objectivity. I think it's an easy and it's a way into this conversation. But I agree with Melissa. It's not a
Mhm.
dirty word by any means. I do think it is something of an artifact of national news in a way. Um,
Right.
I think if you ask people in a local community to be objective about where they live, it's like,
It's very
no,
hard.
I live here,
Right.
right? I care about this place. I'm not objective. I can be fair. I can be balanced. I can produce verifiable facts, but objective, like no, I am of this place. So it
Well,
looks
and I think
different
it can
from
be
the national lens, or the
for
local
me,
lens.
transparency is where it's at. Like if I'm really transparent about who I am and what I'm bringing to the table, or what I'm worried about, or the fact that I, live in the community that I'm reporting on, um, that everybody knows, okay, well, that's where Rebecca's coming from. Like, her big blind spot is that, she thinks gardens should be everywhere, or whatever the
Yeah,
case
she
might
cares
be.
too much about where she.
Exactly, like crazy talk. Um, but when we were talking about, sort of all the people that are in that ecosystem and what the American public wants, from news media, or from information in their communities, I wanted to go in a little bit deeper about who you talked to and how you built, I guess maybe the survey tool, or the methodology around the report, because that really does shape the responses that you get. And I think sometimes news media chases its tail because they're like, well, let's talk to readers, find out what readers want, when really we need to be talking to people who aren't reading or engaging or thinking about the news. So tell me how you guys worked through that. And if you can throw in a little spice about City Bureau, because I think you did that at City Bureau in a really effective way. I think there's a nice correlation there.
Hmm. Well, maybe I'll start by saying, so this report is the second in a series that Commoner's been working on. The first was uh, about the journalism support organizations that support the field. The
Hmm.
idea initially was that we would look at support organizations, um, newsrooms and newsmakers themselves, and funders, those being kind of the three big sectors of how this field runs currently. And for the JSO report, we talked to a bunch of folks in the field. For the Infomakers report, very similarly, our attention has been on this field and the people who are making it. So folks that are working in newsrooms, but
Hmm.
also people who are on the business side, but also people who are funding it, and also people who are supporting it. That said, there's a lot built into here from 15 years of work from this field that I think has really been taking the question of community information needs very seriously, and
Hmm.
talking to people both who are readers, and who aren't. So I think of documenters at City Bureau, speaking of City Bureau, as a good example of this. I spent uh, nearly 10 years, I think, building up the documenters program. And at the beginning, uh, few of them are what I would categorize as like readers of City Bureau. They were people in the community who responded to the opportunity to play a role. That was their
Hmm.
motivating factor. It wasn't like I need to read a thing. They do that, but it was really like I want to be involved. So I think there's a lot of different ways of like conceptualizing like the audience. But for this series, we have been pretty specifically focused on like identifying and building up um, an identity for the local news field, right? And so we spent a lot of time talking to folks like you, folks
Hmm.
who are really thinking really critically about this work and also have ties to their communities.
Hmm. Got it. And so, Melissa, is that sort of, in this sort of series that is going on? Where do you see this work going next? And is it leading to another report around funding organizations, and how do the results kind of inform what Press Forward is trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, the the work that Press Forward is doing is kind of threefold, right? We're a funder, we started with just 2 years ago with about 22 funders, kind of coalescing around this idea that local news is a public good. We needed to go out and kind of make the case to our peers to get
Mhm.
more philanthropy interested and supporting local news. And our coalition has grown to over 120 funders nationwide. I prior to joining Press Forward, I was at the Gates Family Foundation, which is a place-based foundation here in Colorado,
Mhm.
giving statewide, over 75 years old, not related to Bill and Melinda, a local Gates family. And we started about 7 years ago something called the Colorado Media Project.
Mhm.
And, it was really a community based response to the decline of traditional local news outlets, or that was happening because of some consolidation and kind of cutting back of the journalism in our areas. But what it became was really kind of a model, along with a few other similar organizations in the country, for what are now our local chapters. So
Mhm.
Press Forward has 41 different local chapters that are, coalitions of local funders and local journalists, local business leaders, people that care about the future of local news and where people in their place get their information. And so, in a kind of uncertain time with a lot of things changing, having these chapters as centers of gravity is really kind of a way that we see civic leaders in particular engaging in this work. And so, this paper, I think, like I said, kind of comes at a great time for us as a network, because we are learning together. Some of the things that, um, the path that we traveled here in Colorado is becoming, a waypoints along the way for other chapters across the country. We're learning things from new chapters that are starting up in a different time and place. And so, this is what I would consider, field building. It's building a field of funders, and expanding that field of not just funders, but civic leaders who have a stake in the future of local news. I remember when I first, came to, and I started at the Gates Family Foundation. You know, uh, it was just, it was a time when most newspapers were commercial, just all, like, they were just
Mhm.
really commercial enterprises, and kind of at a tipping point of where, there were ways for community members to engage with local newsrooms. And I think that's just been a really great, I guess, outgrowth of it, that we've learned so much more about not just the Denver Post or the Colorado Public Radio or the big players in our state, but like, we have an intimate knowledge now of newsrooms that are serving the Four Corners area,
Mhm.
near Durango and Cortez, or ones smaller newsrooms that are owned by recent arrivals in Aurora, that are really immigrant led, non-English speaking outlets. And so, I think that's the type of ecosystem approach that the
Mhm.
Press Forward is really advocating, is that there's not just one news source that meets everyone's needs in a community, and so the work that Commoner is doing, to kind of help us get our hands around like some common language, to describe the field, is really helping us bring on more funders, more civic leaders into this field, that a lot of times was primarily, just a commercial business enterprise with not a lot of interaction or porousness between community
Mhm.
members.
Yeah. So then essentially these reports kind of serve to knit together like the funders, the organizations, sort of institutional groups. And earlier, Daryl, you were talking about, some of this in like making the case to the public. So, that feels like the next frontier in some ways. I could be totally off. But when you think about making that case to the public on relevance, why news media, not just, little disparate bits of information, but why news matters. What do you say to the public?
I I think this is
Just
exactly the
curious.
question. I mean, yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was living in Chicago and working at City Bureau, a lot of what I was able to say was kind of what I'm saying now. It's just like, uh, a big part of the role that journalism has historically played. There's like a Venn diagram that also involves people who want to improve civic life, right? So the thing I would say to the public there is like, be part of that. I don't mean just like read our newsletter, which is great, read our newsletter, of course, not just give us money when the time comes because we're doing the fundraising call, but like, we're going to pay you, in fact, to be a part of
Mhm,
this as a documenter. That's how important we think your engagement is, that we're going to train you and disaggregate journalism skills so that you have those skills too and you can use them in your own life. I think that kind of promise or outreach from media that is participatory, that is embedded in community, that really cares about where it exists, that enables that kind of proposition. And again, not trying to poo-poo, any newsroom who's trying to make it in the community, but I want to see more newsrooms open up their doors to people. And I think that proposition to the public is a much more exciting and strong one. So I think it all depends on what you're able to offer. And so
mhm,
I see Press Forward doing this work all the time. Kind of like there's a lot of internal discussion and logistics and planning and convening and really thinking very carefully about what messages work. What are people
mhm,
telling us that they need? What has the field been developing? I think of Civic Lex in Kentucky, bringing people in every day to government work, to governance, to news and information. I think of City Bureau, of course. I think of Listening Post Collective. I think of
mhm,
Outlier Media in Detroit. Like we have some really strong models right now that I think have 10 years or 15, 20 of groundwork that I think are really bearing really exciting fruit. And I want to be able to deliver that message to people to say, like, when
mhm,
you think of news, it shouldn't just be like Fox or your CNN or your leaving local station. Like there's more that this kind of civic media, that this landscape of local news can offer you, that goes beyond just kind of reading to the day. It gives you that too, but it offers you a way to like feel like you are doing a thing and in fact be contributing to your community this way. So I want to deliver that message more and more and more. So that was a big part of the report, is to help give folks that language and those
mhm,
models, um, so that we can acknowledge a field that is moving, I think, in this direction towards real concrete outcomes on the ground that aren't just producing content, that are geared at bringing people into this civic renewal that I think has to happen if we want to see, really exciting, like the good discussion, understanding, lower corruption, more people running for
mhm.
office. Pretty real concrete things I think news and information does do for people when it brings them into the process.
Yeah. So now I know we're coming up on our time, and I wish we could talk forever about these things, but I want to understand. There are a lot of news media organizations that are not sort of making that leap. I think sort of listening sessions and embedding in the community. I think there's sometimes a fear, like, oh my goodness, what happens if we let those members of the public in? So, do you have maybe 3 or 4, like, really simple, clear things that a news organization could do to start on that path? And while you're thinking, Darryl, because but I'm curious, I really like, what's an actionable way to put that in place? I want to turn to you, Melissa, just for what's next for Press Forward. And are you going to be doing more reports like this? And how sort of everyday journalists and news organizations can access resources from Press Forward? Like, for instance, Maryland, Delaware, DC does not have a Press Forward chapter. Um, we've been in talks a little bit, but how can our members maybe access some of the resources that Press Forward is creating?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for one thing, I would say, we're about to put out, just over the summer, we did a bunch of investments in journalism service organizations. And I think, especially national funders, I'm talking from the Press Forward national perspective right now. There's been a lot of investment in some journalism support organizations to kind of address some of those direct needs from local news. Like, for example, a lot of our aligned funders are supporting something called Newsmatch. So if you're you know, uh, if you're a nonprofit newsroom, you have access to Newsmatch for, matching dollars with fundraising. There's also, services that are offered through a lot of our grantees, like the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press, for example. Press Forward is doing a lot of different types of grant making. We did the 2 rounds of grants, or sorry, the round of grants to smaller newsrooms. So we have about 205 newsrooms of under 100,000, under $1 million budgets that are kind of in our portfolio right now. But as far as, and then also I would just say if any of your listeners are interested in being a part of starting another Press Forward chapter, certainly, reach out to our team. We, it is sometimes, like it is a funder led initiative. So the Press Forward chapters themselves have to be housed kind of like with a foundation. So we've had a lot of talks with really excited newsroom leaders or university leaders or whatnot that want to start a chapter. And we are really excited to talk with them, but also it really needs to be seated. These are kind of funder-led initiatives. So there's a lot of emphasis, I think, on the peer-to-peer learning that we feel like is unique that Press Forward can kind of be building that part of the field. There's a lot of good energy in journalism collaboratives or university collaboratives already that we just tend to want to support out there as well. So, but I guess I did want to kind of loop back around to your last question, which was just, some tips for, newsrooms that want to, kind of dabble their toes or think about this. Is that I remember I was on a panel with Evan Smith from the Texas Tribune, and one of the things that I always loved that he said when we were on that panel, and he said it again many times, is just like convening in places is like doing the act of journalism. So like when newsrooms that, especially place-based newsrooms, when you can convene people in real life, you set yourself apart from the national news or any news source on the internet. You prove to your community you're there in place. You're hosting local conversations. And to me, that is one of the most powerful roles that journalists can play as conveners of really, important local conversations. So,
Sure. sort of being part of the community to convene
Mhm.
people actively in civic life. So, Darryl, let's end with you and your takeaways for newsrooms who are interested in doing this kind of work.
Uh, I would reach out to other newsrooms doing the work. I mentioned a few
Mm,
of them on this call, and they aren't all just newsrooms. Listening Post Collective has an amazing civic media playbook that really lays this out in really excellent detail. Is geared at people and orgs that are kind of starting out or on this track. There's folks at Impact Architects that are so well versed in this. City Bureau talking about documenters, right? Documenters is in I think 22 cities now and
mhm,
growing. Um, your city could be one of those. Outlier Media has an amazing text like SMS program that they've been doing for a long time that's led to really deep investigations, right?
mm,
I'd say talk to those folks, and you
mhm,
get kind of the challenges, the wins, the real nitty gritty of it, right? Um, Second, I would say maybe like think about community partnerships beyond distribution. I think when I've ever been in a newsroom, when we have thought about community partnerships, it often has been about how to expand readership on a certain
mhm,
article, right? That tends to be kind of the lingua franca of like the currency is the story. Um, but I think we can go beyond that, right? Like I think figure out who the info stewards are in your community. I think that
mhm,
expands the ways in which you can think about community partnerships because they're all over. They're not just in government or at schools, universities. They're at organizing community groups. They're all over the place. And maybe third, I'll come back to what Melissa said. I think convene, convene, convene. Um, I just try it. I think people seeing this work in their lives and you seeing it happen is everything. And I think people give a lot more than they take. And I think you can see that when you are able to convene people in a space where they feel like they're contributing and that they can speak in a way that's going to be heard and to some degree safe. They give you a whole lot. They contribute so much. So I think seeing is believing, and I
mhm.
think thinking about convenings very intentionally and bringing folks in who are thinking about convenings very seriously can open up so many doors to other types of work or ways of doing journalism.
Well, I think this is a tremendous report and really helps to reframe some of the big picture issues that we're looking at in journalism. And so I'm so appreciative to Press Forward for convening and commissioning the report, and to Commoner for executing. I know you do a lot of interesting work in this area and with other mission driven organizations. And so hope to talk to you again someday soon about this work. But this has been a terrific conversation, and I really appreciate your time.
It's
Thank
been
you
great.
so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening to Five Dubs with Rebecca Snyder. Please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts so that others can find us. What do you want to know about local journalism? Email me at rsnyder, SNYDER, at mddcpress.com. Interested in supporting our podcast and journalism? Please donate to our 501c3 Press Foundation. Find out more and see the full episode list and show notes at www.5-dubs.com.